Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love everything you see here, you can buy it all. If you love one watch, you can buy that. Reach out to me directly, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, because everything is for sale. I have full pricing details. If you wish to trade a watch toward a purchase or sell your entire collection, we don't care. We will pay cash, we pay fast, no upper limit on value paid. If you want to sell your watch, trade a watch, buy a watch, reach out to me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. All right, we have a succession of green-themed watches, starting with this one. This is the new 2022 Rolex GMT-Master II 126720 VTNR. Some have called this the Sprite. The timepiece is probably the most playful addition to the GMT collection since the original 2013 Batman, and like that watch, this one's a trailblazer. The first time we have had a green and black bezeled GMT. The ceramic bezel insert features platinum deposits for the characters. The crown is at the 9 o'clock side, and I like the fact that unlike a lot of Lefty timepieces, Rolex decided not to leave the date over at 3 o'clock, so they have a shifted date and a shifted crown. Bi-directional bezel. There are two time zones here. One is a 24-hour format, one's a 12-hour format. You can set those separately, and then you can use the bezel to temporarily offset and capture a third time zone. For example, by setting that 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time and then using the GMT offset of a given city to read the current time in that city. Lacquered dial, white gold hands and indices, 100 meters water resistant, 70-hour power reserve, shock resistant, anti-magnetic, and a chronometer. It's still 40 millimeters in diameter, only 12 millimeters thick, so it wears well on a smaller wrist. I really like this watch. I love the way it looks. I love the way it wears. It is ambidextrous. I want to clarify that. It's not designed to be worn by one or the other. Lefties and righties will find it's comfortable either way. Okay. Now, from the world of aviation and the GMT Master to the world of motorsports, and Gerard Perregaux in 2021 announcing a collaboration with Aston Martin high-performance vehicles. And here we have the 188-piece limited edition Gerard Perregaux Laureato Chrono Aston Martin. So 188 pieces, a few details to set it apart. It is a 904L steel watch, which is uncommon because normally this highly corrosion-resistant steel is only used by Rolex. Now that feature is germane to the Laureato Chrono. What's unique to this one is the Aston Martin Racing Green dial. It's metallic, unlike British Racing Green, and it has some undertones of blue that you don't get in British Racing Green. This is the same color as you would have seen on recent Aston Martin GT racing cars, as well as the 1959 Aston Martin DBR1300, in which Roy Salvadori and Carroll Shelby won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That's where you'll see this green. We also have partly skeletonized hour and minute hands, and then a cross-hatching pattern on the dial. The remainder is white printed with nickel anthracite metallic accents. The whole watch is only 12.4 millimeters thick. It's 42 in diameter. Screw down crowns and pushers. You can see they're faceted the same way the bezel is. The original Laureato came out in 1975. It actually previews some of the later decade developments by IWC, Vacheron Constantin, Rolex, and even Patek Philippe. This predates the Nautilus, for example. So this timepiece, of course, true to that era, with an integrated case, lug profile, a geometrically faceted bezel, and an integrated bracelet. Throw the watch on the wrist, it wears nicely. It is 100 meters water-resistant steel, automatic winding, and well-loomed, so although it's definitely a sports watch, you could absolutely wear this with formal attire, especially as thin as it is. Taking a quick look, we can see the loom, and there's no shortage of it. This watch is well-loomed, easy to read in the dark. The reverse side is crafted in good taste, as this is the only place you'll see overt Aston Martin branding. So on the reverse side, you can see the Aston Martin wings and the name of the company silk screened on underneath. Gerard Perregaux caliber 3300, automatic winding, 46-hour power reserve, hacking seconds, quick set date, 4 hertz beat rate, 63 joules, nicely finished, thin, fine, hand adjusted, and it includes a vertical clutch modular chronograph complication on the top. This is a lovely watch and one of the best modern Aston Martin themed watches since the late great Amvox collection from JLC. Now let's take a look at something that goes way up market here. 43 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. This is the De Bethune DB27 Titan Hawk. Green dial, Grade 5 titanium case, spring-loaded variable geometry floating lugs, and an engraved case flank, and this is part of a limited edition of 10 pieces. So you can see there's a lot to love here. Microlight is an engraving that de Bethune has created, something more contemporary than guilloche, that is more appropriate to the kind of watches they make. Now the watch has a dial, a case, and a movement made in-house, so they're not just building movements. De Bethune is a fully integrated manufacturer. It makes between 200 and 220 watches a year, and it is very exclusive. The timepieces are always advanced, protected by multiple patents, and you can see some of them at play here, as we have a patented technique for fire bluing titanium. This movement is an automatic winder with a 60-hour power reserve. The effective lever arm for the winding rotor is colossal for efficient winding. You can see there's a spiral grading across the bridges, microlight engraving on the blued titanium parts. We have a 2-element flat hairspring that's clamped together and shaped by hand, so it breathes concentrically like an overcoil, but with the flat profile and thinness that you get with flat hairspring. The watch is 43 millimeters in diameter, but it's quite thin. As you can see, it barely projects above the wrist, and because of those variable geometry lugs, though it's a 43, it has no trouble wearing on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. A really cool watch from one of the great modern independents. And I'm not sure if this is a blue or a green dial or a little bit of both, but H. Moser & C, another one of the great modern independents, calls this Pioneer Tourbillon the Blue Lagoon Fumé dial. Now there's a lot to love here. First, the Blue Lagoon color itself. It's lovely. It's aquatic. It's even tropical. Now you can see we have a Moser fade from light at the center to dark at the edge. That's one of their signatures. We also have minimal branding. You can see a very ghost-like lacquered or acrylic signature. It's not engraved. It is an application of either lacquer or acrylic. And then we have Chromalight solid ceramic-based loom on the hands. There's plenty of loom on this dial. And then we have a flying tourbillon. It's a 1-minute tourbillon with a 3 hertz beat rate. And you can see it is beautifully finished. It is the best finished part of the movement, and that's really where you want to see the most attention to detail. Moser delivers 2 hairsprings, flat hairsprings, 180 degrees opposed, so when one is caused to slow by gravity, the other is in the exact opposite position. So when one slows, the other speeds up by an equal and opposite margin, instantaneously restoring the precision of the watch. Now the watch has a screw-down crown. You can see lovely coined case flanks. In steel, it's 42.8 millimeters in diameter, and it's 120 meters water resistant. The watch does include a manufacturer movement automatic winding with a 3-day power reserve. You can see for efficiency, the tourbillon pivots on ceramic bearings, then the rotor itself also pivots on ceramic bearings for higher efficiency. Nicely decorated. You can see there's one golden chaton holding a pivot jewel fixed by 3 screws, a nod to the pocket watch era of manufacturing. And of course, we have a limited series of 50. This is a limited watch. Only 50 are going to be made. It's a large watch, but I could absolutely wear this. Now, what I like about Moser is the parallel design. You can see they always feature echoes. You have coined case flanks, then you have coining on the buckle itself. So this buckle is not a generic Moser piece. It's designed specifically for the Pioneers. Again, despite the near 43 millimeter size, it's fairly easy to wear, and it's not all that thick, as much of the thickness is tied up in the domed profile of the sapphire. Okay, we've got a little bit of a rivalry that I didn't anticipate, but last year we received a couple of new entrants in the vintage-inspired precious metal dive watch category, and I love to compare these two. Here we have the Tudor Black Bay 58 18 karat in yellow gold, and here we have the 2nd generation Omega Seamaster 300. This pays tribute to, among others, the 7922 and other no crown guard, chaptering, no date Tudor Submariners of the 1950s and early 60s, and then the dial pays tribute to later snowflake Tudor Submariners from late 60s through mid 70s. So this watch is very true to those, but it's not specifically an homage to either. This watch, though, the 2nd generation Seamaster 300, is an homage to the original Omega 1957 CK 2913, which was the first professional diving Seamaster. The watches are both made of unconventional precious metal. Here we have 18 karat yellow gold. One of the reasons why this watch costs almost $17,000, which is mental for a Tudor Black Bay. This is more affordable at about $11,600 when it's new, but it is a different kind of gold. You can see one is more yellow and almost bronze-like. The other one has red undertones, and it almost looks like rose gold. So this is actually actually hallmarked 9 carat. It's 37.5% gold, and then the remainder is bronze, palladium, and copper. There are some other elements thrown in, but those are the primaries. This is 41 millimeters. This is 39 millimeters, but where I really see a difference, and this is a decision point for me, is in the thickness, where the Tudor is 12 millimeters thick and the Omega is 14.8, and that despite trying to make the second generation Seamaster 300 a thinner watch. Now this watch has a 60-click bezel with an anodized aluminum insert. This bezel, as you can see, is only slightly loomed. The bezel pearl itself is luminescent. Much different for the Seamaster 300. This features a fully loomed bezel, and not only is the bezel fully loomed, the dial is more extensively loomed than the Tudor, plus you have a green luminescent pearl and a green minute hand, which makes it easy to quickly line up your timing references. Now, there is a lot of difference in how these fit. They're not all that different lug to lug, but there are big differences in how they square up on the wrist. And before we discuss, we may as well turn them over so you can see Tudor's folly. This caliber, MT5400, is impressive in that it was designed specifically for this case size, though it has the exact same tech specs as the bigger MT5600 series. The problem is, it is ugly. Now, you don't have to see it when the watch is on your wrist, but this is a cynical ploy to impress people who don't know the difference, whereas this, although equally machine finished, it better fills the case back. It's more interesting to look at. Omega clearly thought about how to make a machine finished movement attractive with both black polished and actual blackened screws and a lovely spiraled arabesque Côte de Genève. Now, I would argue that this is a worthwhile display case back, whereas here I would do away with the 10 Swiss franc sapphire. I'd rather have another ½ ounce of gold on my watch. Now, there are some tech advantages for the Tudor, namely the fact that the Tudor has a much thinner movement, sits lower on the wrist because it has a more compact caliber, plus a 70-hour power reserve versus here with a 60-hour power reserve. But this watch does feature a mobile hour hand that you can set independently while neither disrupting the minute nor the seconds hand. We have a wonderful feeling 120-click bezel versus a 60-click bezel. And again, this is a ceramic insert within the bezel. You can see that we have a dramatically domed sapphire to echo the vintage plexiglass, whereas on the Tudor, it's not quite as obvious. Both of them are attractive. Which one would I prefer? Cost no object, probably the Tudor, but from a tech and aesthetic standpoint, especially if casebacks are brought into consideration and loom is a consideration, the Omega is really appealing. Let's throw them both on the wrist and see how they wear. Although they're not all that different in size, 41 versus 39, you can see that the Omega is a much larger watch. Now, it has a sandwich style dial with a stencil over a loomed disc like a Panerai, so it has a very different look. The dial, though it doesn't have any applique like the Tudor, it does actually look more expensive. And one of the big changes from the first generation Seamaster 300 to this one is that now all of the spiel about the tech specs of the movement is on the reverse of the case, and the dial just says Omega Seamaster 300, which is probably how it should have been from the beginning. Now, throwing the Tudor on the wrist, the Tudor is the watch I actually preferred to wear. It's just more compact, a lot thinner at 12 millimeters, and usefully shorter across the wrist. There's not a huge lug-to-lug difference between them. I would consider this more of a unisex option, whereas the Omega is almost just for guys. Still, cost no object, the Tudor would be my choice, and I'm generally not a colored gold guy. Okay, lining up another rivalry here, you can see two steel watches in the 40 millimeter range from two very different sides of the world, the best of East and West, both blue, both steel, both similar in size. Here we have the 2021 Omega Seamaster Aquaterra Small Second, then here we have the Grand Seiko Heritage Collection Spring Drive Automatic SBJ 407, better known as the Skyflake. Now, this one is 41, this one is 40.2. There's not a whole lot of difference between how they actually wear. The real differences are aesthetic and technical. Here, we have a dial that features hands and dial furniture entirely crafted by manual means by artisans who use diamond-tipped micrometric milling tools. So these components are all formed by hand, finished by hand, and then placed by hand. The dial includes 8 primary steps and 80 intermediate steps, so small steps in order to create this wind-blown snowdrift texture. And the blue coloration is added to give it a little bit more warmth than the original SBGA 11 snowflake. Here we have a 41mm case that includes a dial that has a sort of horizontal pattern, the so-called teak deck, to remind you of a yacht. And then we have these applique indices that are handsome but clearly machine-made. The cases are a little bit different because this one is a very generic Omega lyre style lug case, attractive and more water resistant than the Grand Seiko, but not quite as artisanal as what we get here. Now, the elegance and heritage designs at Grand Seiko are designed to evoke vintage Grand Seiko watches. And here we have a case design that is supposed to evoke the original 3180, the first Grand Seiko watch from 1960, and it does that. It's still 100 meters water resistant, so it looks like a dress watch, but there's not as big a difference between these two as you might imagine. Now, this one comes on an alligator strap, so you're going to have to swap that if you want to swim with it, but on the right strap, you can swim with both of these watches. Here we have a 72-hour power reserve. Here we have a 60-hour power reserve. This watch has a feature very similar to what you saw on the Seamaster 300, where I can actually move the hour hand independently while the watch remains keeping time. But I have a 60-hour power reserve here and a coaxial escapement. Whereas here, I have a 72-hour power reserve with power reserve indicator. I have hacking seconds. I have a quick set date should I desire to quick set. I have the continuously smooth gliding action of spring drive, which you can see here. There's no start or stop. There's no escapement, so to speak. So while you have a, quote, sweeping seconds hand on the Omega, and I should probably have wound it before the video, but it will move in tiny increments. It will stagger along, whereas this is truly a smooth sweep. Now, that seconds hand, like everything else on that watch, receives quite a bit of handcraft, as it is fired manually. It is steel. It is fired manually over flame to create the blue hue you see here. The case is hand finished using a spinning tin plate. The watch is held directly against the spinning tin plate. It is a laborious and complex process that requires about 3 years to master. And the spring drive technology is unique in that it entails no batteries, no motors, and no capacitors, but it does use mechanical action to create an induced electrical current that wakes up a quartz regulator that slows a braking wheel, and that unidirectional braking wheel is geared to the hands at center, so though there is nothing inside but a mainspring to animate the watch, it does manage quartz accuracy, but with a lot of mechanical watchmaking. This is not disposable consumer electronics. This is a lifetime movement, not just the lifetime of the owner, but the lifetime of the watch, which is potentially hundreds of years. This one wears a little bit better, but the difference between them is not as great as you would think, neither in thickness nor in lug-to-lug measurement. And you can see here that this is a watch that wears well. It wears compact for a 41. Just the timepiece has a strap that's a bit more rigid than what you'll find on the Grand Seiko. So you can see the strap wants to flare and fight a little bit. It wants to splay out across your wrist, whereas this one has a conventional spring bar junction system. It'll pull straight down on your wrist. Now here we have a strap that is wonderfully luxurious. I always thought Grand Seiko straps are uncanny in their ability to feel smooth, soft, and broken in, even when, as here, the strap is a brand new piece. And that despite the fact that it's half alligator leather, which tends to be very stiff. You can even see they take the heritage theme on these Grand Seiko heritage and elegance pieces all the way down to the buckle where a vintage logo is used. Let's say, though, you want the standard in luxury watches. Well, I like Omega and I like Grand Seiko, but most people would argue that the Lexus of the luxury watch world isn't actually a Japanese watch, it's a Swiss watch. Because of the consistency of Rolex and the quality of Rolex, I'm more likely to compare them to Lexus than Mercedes-Benz, which over the last 2 decades has had a hit and miss series of styling snafus and quality lapses. You don't get that with Rolex, just like you don't get that with Lexus. So this Datejust 36 is the Lexus of all-arounders. And it is an all-arounder. It's loomed, it's automatic, it's 100 meters water resistant. It could be a dress watch, but it's also a sports watch. It's a man's watch, but it's also sized for a lady's wrist. It has a lovely dark rhodium metallic sunburst dial, a near 3-day power reserve. It's shock resistant, anti-magnetic, and because the Jubilee bracelet is now so robustly constructed, you really don't need a 3-link Oyster bracelet to wear this for active lifestyle pursuits such as cycling, jogging, swimming. You can use the Jubilee, and it actually has more vents or gaps between the links on the bottom than the Oyster does, so it vents the wrist better on a hot day. You do get the 5mm Easylink system, just like you do on the GMT I showed you, so 5mm in or out. A very comfortable watch to wear, and like the GMT, it uses Rolex's proprietary Chromalight Loom, so when the lights go out, the loom goes on. It is a very, and you can actually see the reflections of other loomed watches I've got on the table here in the polished flank of this watch. But it is a very bright watch, lovely to look at, an excellent and contemporary, and dare I say youthful application of two-tone. Rose and steel just plays more contemporary than yellow gold and steel. I have to admit, I don't see many of these. It is a very expensive and very complicated and very exclusive watch. But from the Saxonia family, we have a showpiece for its brand, originally launched in 2007. This is the Alango Unzona Langa 31, and it's a hell of a lot more than 31 millimeters. It's almost 46. At 45.9 millimeters in platinum, it's like a platinum hockey puck on your wrist. Now let's throw this on the wrist, because first things first, you don't get involved with a watch like this unless you know you can wear it. I could pull it off but it would be a monumental undertaking. I would be consistently aware of the mass of my watch, and while I don't necessarily mind that, I kind of like the idea of feeling where the money went. This is an insistent and ever-present reminder that you're wearing a gigantic Langa. So if you want something that fits like a second skin, get an Octo Finissimo. If you want the ultimate in hefty luxury, this is that. Now, there's a lot going on here. Despite the fact that you have basically 3 hands, a date, and a power reserve, the movement inside is a monumental piece with 2 mainspring barrels, each 25 millimeters in diameter. They're stacked. This caliber right here, the L034, has a month's worth of power reserve and can only be wound using a ratcheting key that inserts into the case back. Now, because you have so much energy in the mainspring barrels, when this watch is fully wound, it would produce enough energy to destroy the escapement. So, as with the Zeitwerk, there is a second locking lever and a remontoir d'égalité, so no matter how wound or discharged, as long as there's enough energy to drive the watch, the balance will maintain constant amplitude. And that's very important, because this watch is not just about going a month between windings. It's about performing well in between those windings. The indices and the hands, the frame for the date, all gold. The dial, a solid disc of sterling silver. It's like a silver dollar inside a platinum hockey puck. And of course, the watch features the Langa Panorama Datum, which you can still index using a little pusher. It features a remarkably elaborate clasp. Remember, most Langa watches, like that Odysseus we just saw, only have a pin buckle. Those that have deployant clasps generally use snap-shut clasps. Here, we have a clasp that closes and locks until you press 2 triggers. But wait, there's more. We have a little lock inside the buckle that is used to snap shut and secure the strap. So due to the weight of the watch, you would otherwise have to worry about the strap pulling through the buckle of the clasp when you're taking it off. So we have this little locking system that has ceramic pin snaps internally, and you can see that little white ceramic ball. That's there to prevent the tolerance of this from ever diminishing, as the platinum of the clasp cannot wear down that little ball. So it will always be snappy. It locks into place. This is a remarkably complex multi-$1,000 clasp that was designed specifically for this model. And as you can see, by itself, it weighs more than some ultra-thin dress watches. This is a very impressive watch and a rare opportunity to own something that is both artistically and technically virtuoso. I mentioned the Odysseus, and we may as well take a look at the Odysseus. Like I said, most Longa watches include a pin buckle. This is a great one. It has a couple of clever features built in, designed to make the watch easier to wear and easier to move from your wrist. But all the action here is on the dial side of the watch. The case is similar to other Longa watches, but not identical. As you can see, there's more faceting about the mid-case than you normally find on a Longa watch. We have lugs that are stepped out and a domed bezel, so that's not new. That'll be familiar to Longa fans. We have this little end link that helps to integrate the strap with the case. So whether you're wearing this watch in steel and titanium form on a bracelet or in white gold form on a strap, there's going to be a very progressive integration of the lugs into the taper of the bracelet. There's a little push button system on the bottom to quick release the strap, and you can see that the strap is a brand new Longa factory strap. It's extensively hollowed out on the underside to make it more flexible, but also to allow the wrist to breathe. Now the watch has a dial that's made of brass, and then it is covered with this nickel anthracite color, and the hands, as well as the frames for the dates, day and date I should say, those are all white gold. Now the watch is 120 meters water resistant with a screw down crown, and there is no shortage of luminescence. It is quite well loomed. The watch also features a hidden system for adjusting the day and the date. So you can see the crown guard is actually a set of triggers that you can use for adjusting the calendar. The dial has a nice symmetry about it because of the placement of that day-date system, and then the feel is actually quite good, almost like a column wheel chronograph, a fine column wheel chronograph, a dotograph, in fact. The movement here is based on the L086, but there are some changes made. For one thing, it has less power reserve than the L086. This is 50 hours, but there's a reason for that. It's because Longa used a higher beat rate on this movement, making it more appropriate and more resilient in sporting use. So a higher beat rate means your watch is less likely to lose or gain time if it gets shocked or concussed during use. We also have a change for a full balance bridge, so it's anchored on both sides, not just one. That better braces the balance against shock. Now the movement is otherwise made of German silver, which is a nickel copper zinc alloy. That's where it gets its golden hue. And you can see that that same alloy is also used for the Longa 31. Finishing is uncompromising on both watches. You can see mirrored anglage there, and you can see mirrored anglage here, although there are not a lot of bridges because it's constructed with a 3/4 style bridge like an old Longa pocket watch. You can see we have freehand engraving on the balance bridge. It is a free-sprung balance with hacking seconds, and you can see that the swan's neck is beautifully black polished in its own right, and we have both black polished and fired blue screws on this movement. You can see stripes, engine turned perlage, mirrored anglage, one golden chaton fixing a pivot jewel held by screws. That is yet another nod to the way watches were made in the pocket watch era of watchmaking in East Germany. And very few expenses spared here. As you can see, a platinum mass is used on the rotor, not 22 karat, not 21 karat, not 18 karat gold, and certainly not tungsten. It is a movement befitting Longa's reputation. Fun fact, you can always look at Longa cases and bracelets and clasps and figure out who made them. BRO is Brogioli, which is a clasp and bracelet maker in Ticino, the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And then on the case, SUG is Zinn. So if you're familiar with Zinn Spezialuren, the sports watch maker out of Frankfurt, they own a case company called SUG, and that makes a lot of the precious metal cases for Longa. So at 40.5 millimeters in diameter and 11.3 millimeters thick, it's a really compact watch that's easy to wear. I wouldn't call it a unisex option because it is pretty broad at 52.2 millimeters across the wrist, but it's easy to cuff, probably more appropriate as a dress watch than the titanium or steel equivalents. And the watch, to me, looks and feels better on a strap than it does on a bracelet. The watch is easy to fit underneath a cuff, too, so there should be no problems in that regard. A very versatile watch. I like to end with a blockbuster watch, which is why I often end with a De Bethune timepiece. They are all Grail watches, and here we have the first use of floating lugs on a De Bethune watch. This is the DB26 Perpetual Calendar, 44 millimeters in white gold, and it was released in 2008. So this was the first time we saw the variable geometry spring-loaded lug system that would become famous on the later DB28. This was also the first time De Bethune used sapphire hands, because this is a perpetual calendar, and their perpetual calendar system would otherwise be blocked for large swaths of the day if the hands weren't transparent. The dial, the case, and of course the movement, all made by De Bethune, Lots of patents protecting. Here you see fired blue titanium surrounding a moon phase. The process for firing titanium blue, which you'll see on hands, the hour cabochon, as well as the surround of the moon phase, that is patented. You'll also note that the moon phase is 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium, and this moon phase, which is a sphere, is patented. It has an adjustment interval of once every 1,112 years. The rest is a perpetual calendar. It need be adjusted only once during the year 2100, which in a quirk of the Gregorian calendar is not a leap year. Otherwise, this watch needs no help keeping time. It has an inverse bullhead winder, so you wind it down at 6 o'clock. And then on the reverse side, you can see this is an early version of de Bethun's patented caliber 2005 twin barrel movement. So in perpetual calendar, guys, it's manual wind with a 5-day power reserve. You cannot accidentally overwind it. It has twin self-adjusting barrels that will prevent you from overwinding it. This is an early example of their 1, 2, 3 shock protection spring triple parachute shock protection system. We also have de Bethun's proprietary 2-element hand-formed and clamped hairspring, which is thin and shock resistant like a flat hairspring, but breathes concentrically like an overcoil. And we have one of many patent balance wheels from de Bethun. Denis Flageolet, who is the genius watchmaker behind de Bethun, is a scientist first and a watchmaker second, and so he is always striving to create a better balance, always trying to push the limits of how little impact temperature can have on timing, how much of the mass of the balance can be concentrated in the rim, and how little aerodynamic drag the balance can create. He takes all of this into consideration. You can see the balance is partly fire-blued titanium, and it has bulbs of platinum outboard. You'll appreciate that we have Côte de Bethune, a type of Côte de Genève across the split deltoid barrel bridge. We have satination on the wheels, including the barrels. We have black polished screws, as well as a black polished balance bridge. The screws all feature chamfered slots and circumference. A matte finished media blasted baseplate, and if you look, there's mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges. So while this watch is very advanced in its technology and avant-garde in its style, nevertheless, it is a timepiece that respects traditional haute horlogerie technique, which is absolutely critical because at de Bethune, not only do they make every part of the watch, but they make every part of the watch beautifully. A brand without compromise that only creates grail watches. And this is the DB26 Perpetual Calendar. If you see something here that you like or anything on the Watchbox platform, or you want to sell or trade a watch, reach out to me, tmasso@thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out. Have a great weekend, and thanks for logging on.